knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and goodness. Through these He has given us His very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. Let us sing. Standing on the promises of Christ my King, who eternal ages let His praises sing. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises that cannot fail. When the howling storms of God and fear assail, by the living word of God I shall prevail. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Standing. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of Christ the Lord. Bound to Him eternally, my love's strong cord. Overcoming daily with the Spirit's sword. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises I cannot fall. Listening every moment to the Spirit's call. Resting in my Savior as my all in all. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God.
We have this morning with us Lee Lester. Lee is son of John Lester. Lee is currently serving as a missionary in China. He is with an independent group that sends missionaries into the area. And he's going to share his testimony with us this morning and what God is doing with him and using him in that area. And he knows more about it than I do, so I'm going to let him come on up. Brother.
Thank you, Brother Joel. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, yes, I'm going to share my testimony, and then after that, and I hope this will kind of be a casual thing. If any of you have any questions during the time, you can write them down, and then I'll kind of have a little time for questions at the end. So like he said, I am a physical and spiritual fruit of this church. My mother and father were both baptized here not too long ago, and I grew up in Hope, Arkansas. I'm now 30 years old, and I grew up in a Baptist church in Hope, and I kind of came to faith. I remember I was about 11 or 12. I remember being baptized, all that, and then I remember after that I would sometimes sit in bed at night when I was in junior high school and just pray to God, am I really saved? You know, I wanted I want to be saved again. I just wanted to make sure. I wasn't really sure of my, eternal security. And then I kept on living life, and I kind of viewed, I guess, being saved as kind of a finish line instead of a starting point in a new race. I just kind of like, all right, I'm saved. I can keep on living my life, kind of doing what I want to do. And so that's what I did. I started, started partying and just doing bad things, and just kind of, sin. It grows. You give the devil an inch, he'll take a foot, and that's what happened. So I went off to college and was in a fraternity, and it's a little different situation in college. You have a lot more freedom, so I was able to do a lot more bad things. And I just kept on living that life of carnality. And after college, I graduated with a degree in marketing and business. That was the easiest way out of college. I didn't learn much, but I didn't have to learn another language, and so that was good enough for me. So I graduated, and then I started trying to find a job. Started in the young professional kind of life, and that can be very scary, especially if you didn't take school very serious, so your grades weren't very good, so you couldn't really find a very good job. And so I started working for a bank in the area, and I just was really confused. I had no direction, no purpose in life, and it was because it was money problems and girl problems and a lot of other problems. I went to church one Sunday, to a church nearby, and after that, I just got hungry for the Word. I started reading the Bible every night, and I started to, was just hungry from this, but I started trying to apply it. That's the hard part. A lot of these stories I'd known before. I'd known them in my head, but I didn't know them. I didn't use them in my life and really apply it. That's the hard part of living the Christian life. So I started doing that, and just the Lord, I really feel, because of growing up in the church, I really had it was kind of like a fire. I had a lot of kindling, a lot of wood, but I just didn't have any spark. And once I started, it just lit pretty quick. And I started just trying to serve in my community, serve my church in different areas. And I still had the job that I hated, and that didn't change. But I realized, kind of like, I think it was Ruth, just kind of abiding in the Lord. I knew that the Lord had me there for a reason, so I started to at least do the simple things from the book that it tells us to do. I tried to do those at my work, tried to minister to other people and minister to people, talk to them on the phone. After I did that for about another year, then the Lord kind of gave me the idea to go overseas. Usually you can go overseas and teach English with any degree. So I'd never been on a mission trip. I'd never taught a class before. So, I remember him mentioning that Wednesday night they needed teachers. So there's no excuses. Even if you've never taught before, you can still come and help and volunteer with Wednesday night, because I went to China. I'd never taught a class before. So the Lord, I'll tell you a quick story about that. I was looking on the internet for some type of a faith-based organization to get overseas, but the problem is a lot of these countries, it's illegal, so it's kind of hard to find an organization that sends Christian teachers. So I looked, I couldn't find anything, and the next week was Thanksgiving week, and I came down early. We have some hunting land over by Garland City, over in that area, and I came down early for a funeral at the First Baptist Church in Hope, and I met this girl from high school, and I was like, "What are you doing these days?" And she goes, "Well, I work for this company in Colorado that sends Christian teachers to teach English in China." So I was like, wow. So and then I mentioned it to some cousins down at our duck club, and they're like, "Well, we got a friend that also works for a company out of Colorado that does the same thing." found out the next few days that was the same company. And then I was serving with some friends, with an older fella in Fayetteville, and I told him about the company, and he said, well, my wife's brother is the vice president of that company. So that was enough signs for me. And so I really was confident, and what I did is I committed to 2 years in China for teaching English. So I'll go a little bit about my company real quick, and a little bit about my specific situation and my experience for the last 2 years. So the company is a nonprofit company that sends Christian teachers to teach English in Asia, they say, because we're in a lot of different countries besides China. We're also starting to move into the Middle East a little bit. So, but we do have to raise our own support. So each individual teacher does have to raise their own financial support. So I did that. That's a struggle in itself, asking people for money. So especially with your pride, I've learned a lot through that about, it takes, sometimes it's your pride that keeps you from doing that. You think, well, I can make my own money. I don't need anybody else. But the truth is, it all comes from the Lord anyway. So that's a little bit about my company. The way it works is usually we have teams within the area, the city that you're in. So my situation was, we were at a university, and there was a group of about 4 of us that were all Americans, that were all English teachers together. So we're all at the same company, so we're doing the same thing. Excuse me. So what we do is we are teaching English in the classroom, and so some opportunities we have in the classroom. Now this is not, I don't want to make any general statements about Asia, about how we share the gospel, but this was my specific situation in my specific city, in my specific university, because different leaders of different universities give you a little more freedom to do what you want in the classroom. So we were able to, in the classroom, talk about Christmas. We were able to talk about the real reason for Christmas. We can talk about Easter, talk about the real reason of Easter. I was able to tell them my favorite book is the Bible, and that I am a Christian. But we are very professional in the way that we do that, because we are English teachers. And so that's a few ways. Another few examples, maybe a topic would be for English class, character and personality. So we would tell them this old story called The Good Samaritan. So we would tell that in class, or we'd tell another old story about the lost son, the prodigal son. So those are some stories that we use in the class, and they practice telling stories back and forth, and we discuss the character and personality of the different characters in the classroom, in that story. So those are some examples of how in the class we're able to, I guess, spread a little salt, or sprinkle a little salt, or as we say in China, sprinkle a little MSG on it. So other ways is outside of the classroom. We spend a lot of times, I spend a lot of times trying to play basketball, tennis, swimming, just hanging out with guys. One thing is, China, they absolutely love Americans. They love America, but it's mainly because of the iPhone, Coca-Cola, Justin Bieber, Taylor Swift. Those are the reasons that they love America. But the Lord uses those things, and so they want to get to know me. And if I didn't tell them no sometimes, I could spend all my waking hours with students, because they want to improve their English, and they want to learn about our culture, things like that. So that's a way that I just build relationships with them, and we're just intentional about any conversation. If they bring up a conversation worried about a situation or a family member sick, we just try to be intentional about leading that conversation into a deeper conversation about spiritual things. We tell them our experiences. So really the same way that you would share the gospel with people really through relationships, kind of earning their trust, and then just waiting for the Lord to give you those doors to open, and then you just use them. Sometimes it's a little scary. I mean, for us, we could be worried that maybe they would tell somebody else that we told them these things. So we have to be very, to use a lot of discernment and prayer for protection. So those are some examples of how we kind of spread the gospel in China. Some other things is once a student is asking a lot of questions to us, he keeps asking me some, and maybe my teammates some other questions about our faith. Then we realize that they're seeking or they're searching. It's kind of like we look for the cat on the screen door that really wants in. So those are the ones, and we will ask them or challenge them to have a Bible study. Usually about 6 or 7 weeks. That's once a week, and then a lot of them have never seen a Bible before. A lot of them, we'll explain the idea of a Bible. A lot of them think Christianity is from America. They don't even know it's from the Middle East. So there's a lot of different things. But over the last 3 years at my campus, I was only there for 2, but for the last 3 years there has been, I think about 7 or 8 new believers within the last 3 years. So that's kind of an idea. This was a campus of about 20,000 students. So, but there's probably a lot of other students that we just didn't know that came to faith through some other way, through other Chinese people. But at least for us, because we're only really able to speak to about 10 to 15% of the students, because those are the only ones that have the ability to speak English. And really, some of them have the ability, but they're afraid to, because it's a shame-based culture. So it's called lose face. So if I was to trip over and fall, I would lose face in the Chinese culture. So they're afraid to make mistakes in front of other people. So that's one thing when you learn language, you're going to make mistakes. So those are some reasons why it prevents us from meeting more people. I'd say, 10 to 15% of the students are confident enough to talk to us and want to spend time with us. And we develop relationships. Spend a lot of time eating with them and doing other things, shopping. I was in a city of about 5 million people, but it's a city you probably never heard of before. There's a lot of cities that are about 5 million people in China. So the cities are they're small, probably the size of, smaller than, I would say, the size of, Hot Springs, or a city of about the size of 30,000 in America would be about 5 million in China, but it's very dense. It would take you about an hour to get from one side to the next, because it's just a lot of apartments and a lot of traffic. So that's just a little bit about what I was doing for the last 2 years in China. Now the Lord has kind of directed me in a path for, I will be going back next Sunday to China, but I will be starting language study, where I will be a full-time student to learn the Mandarin, which is their official language is Mandarin Chinese. There's a lot of different dialects, but they had to make one official language. So that's the one that I will be learning. It is, they say, one of the hardest languages for a Westerner to learn. So I do have a big challenge ahead of me. But through my company, we have a partnership with the university. So there will be about 11 or 12 other believers that I'm familiar with that will be going through this with me. So we'll have a really good support group, a good community there, because living in another culture can be difficult at times. A lot of things are totally different. It's a lot louder there. If you go to a Walmart, there's people everywhere, and people cut you off. It can be very frustrating sometimes. It's very dirty. People spit on the floor. People spit on airplanes. You see children going to the restroom on the sidewalk, or even sometimes inside a shopping mall. Things like that. So it's a different culture, and so there can be some struggles with that. But having a community of believers, a church, really is what we have. A church is not the building; it's actually the people inside. So it's very important. So I've really been blessed with this company to have this. My company's been in China for over 30 years since they actually opened the doors to the world back in the early 80s. So I have a lot of, I guess they have, they're just very familiar with teaching us. So I will be learning conversational or oral Mandarin. Mostly I will be learning how to read and write a little bit. I'll also be studying the book of Mark in Chinese and learning how to share my testimony and really evangelize in Chinese, because that's really a whole set of vocabulary, like football or anything else. It's just a whole different set of vocabulary. So that's kind of what the Lord has planned for me for the next 2 years. But my commitment was for the next 4 years. So I have 2 years to learn the language, and then I'll have 2 years after that to teach again. So kind of like the military, you're with it for 2 years and you have to serve for another 2 years after that. But because of that, my financial needs have doubled. I was making a small salary in China. As a teacher, I was making about $600 a month. So that's enough to make it over there, but there's a lot of other, I also had to raise funding for the other side, which is to pay for my travel, and I have international insurance in case there was some, I had a bad injury or something like that. They would be able to fly me to Beijing or fly me all the way back here to America to get proper health care, because the health care in China is not, it's decent, but it's not up to American standards. So that's a little bit about me. Do y'all have any questions about any? Yes?
What are the government restrictions on worship or sharing the gospel?
Okay, good question. He said, what are the government restrictions on sharing the gospel? Well, I guess one overall thing you need to know is nothing is the same in different cities, or really even different areas of a city. So there is some laws, but Chinese people view law differently than Americans do. We view it a law, so you don't do it. They view it a law, but in certain circumstances, they would break that law. So, for example, there was a church that we attended there, and it's illegal for you to evangelize to anyone under 18 in China. But I went to a church there, and there was also a police officer that went to the same church, but they had children come up and do plays in front of everybody. They had Sunday school. So there are laws, but it's kind of like they choose when and when not to, apply those rules. And there is some persecuting of churches in China of Christians. There's actually, everything is quite complex in China, so I feel long-winded sometimes when I have to explain things. There is actually a government-run church, which is called the Three Self Church in China. That means that the government oversees this church. So the authority is not the word, it is the government. So they kind of make sure that they are teaching that's not anti-China or anti-Communist Party. But not all government churches are like that. Not all of them are, I guess the government doesn't have their hand in as much of all the different government churches in China. So that's one type of church, it's a three self. The second one is the underground church. The underground church is usually people who do not trust the government, so they will not go to a three self church just because of that. And say all three self churches are bad, which that's not really true, but in a way it is. So the underground churches are usually in apartments, and they have church leaders. They usually in one city they'll have a couple of different locations, usually near universities. And these house church leaders or underground church leaders will kind of go around and minister to the different ones. But sometimes they can be arrested and abducted and then Christian again. A lot of them will go to work in those labor camps, things like that. But it really depends. It's really different areas of China. Sometimes even the same city, different areas within the city, the government is, we call it the weather is good weather or bad weather. That's what we say in China. We do have to speak a lot in kind of secret code. So, good question. Thank you. Any other questions you have?
Lee, I have read that within the next 10 years, China may become the largest Christian nation because their hope for Christianity outstrips that of America. Is that true?
Yes, sir. The Lord is moving in China. Even if I would have not been there, there'd be many people coming to the Lord. But of course, one thing you have to think about in China, if it's numbers, they're always going to win. They're always going to beat everybody because there's 1.3 billion people. That's a third of the world's population is in China. So, yes, there are many Chinese there. It's growing very quickly. Part of that is because they know that it came from America. They know it's a Western, which it's really not, but they think it's a Western, and so it's kind of looked on in a good way in that sense. But the problem is there's a lot of false teaching. It's very easy because there's a lot of people becoming Christians, but they don't know a lot about the Bible. So I feel like that's a big reason that the Lord has me and a lot of my other colleagues there is to try to disciple them properly and teach them some foundations.
Do you have Bibles that's converted into their language?
Yes, sir. They do have many Bibles. One that we used with our friends and students was a Chinese Bible that had English and Chinese in it. A lot of our students actually prefer to use the English version instead of the Chinese version. They say it's more vivid because of their culture. Some of the, I think, terminology, vocabulary that they use, like for example, the word God in Chinese, they just have for their culture, it has, I guess, a confusing meaning because I think they use that new word for God for maybe other things as well. So they do have a couple of different translations, I think 2 or maybe 3 different Chinese translations of the Bible. One thing is interesting, they did not translate it directly from the Greek or the Hebrew or Aramaic to Chinese. It actually was from English to Chinese. Which is interesting.
Did you pick up any Chinese over there?
Yes, sir. I picked up a little. I'll tell you. 你好，我在中国是老师 which means hello, I live in China and I'm a teacher. Yeah, so I've learned a little bit just survival Chinese, learned numbers, of course, to make sure I know how much something costs. Learned some foods over there. I love Chinese food, by the way. It's nothing like the food at the Chinese restaurants here. It's totally different. Yes, but it's a lot of vegetables, not much meat at all. Meat's expensive. The most common meat is pork over there. They say there's 2 pigs for every person in China. That's a lot of pigs. Yes, ma'am.
The prevalent religions or faiths, atheism and...
Well, they will say China is an atheist country, but of course that's not true. They believe they have a lot of ancestor worship. They have one holiday called Tomb Sweeping Festival. It's where they go and sweep the tomb, clean the tombs of their ancestors, but then they will offer fruits and cigarettes, and beer, course of beer on them. Sometimes they'll even make little paper houses, paper iPhones, paper cars, and burn them, and money and burn them, and it goes into the afterworld, to their ancestors. So their family, because it's just so much about survival in China. They're still a developing nation. Their families are very close, very tight-knit. So those are some reasons. So they worship their ancestors. There is some Buddhist over there. few Hindu. And then in the northwest region, Beijing and all the developed areas all on the east coast, kind of like it would be the, North Carolina, all the way up to Boston, really, up in that area, if we were to put an American map on top of the Chinese map. But in the northwest, so it would be the Oregon, California, all of that, that's heavily Muslim areas. That's where you hear of riots and bombings. The Chinese call them terrorists. There are a lot of Muslims in that area from Turkish descent, so they speak Russian and Kazakh and a lot of different languages over there, but that's all desert, so it's kind of like two different worlds. Really, China's the same landmass almost as America, so it really is very, very large. Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you for letting me come. I also want to thank an old pastor here. His name was Bruce Tippett. He's actually in Fayetteville now, and he was one that, along with my father and some others, encouraged me to come here. So he just moved from Jonesboro and retired, and he's now working in Fayetteville. So, thank you all.